I'm having a kid, so we're going to live together now. You poor woman can get out." My brother yelled loudly. To this, both my father and mother nodded in agreement. Seeing them easily cast me aside after I was forcibly brought back home years ago, where I helped take care of my mother and bore the cost of living, I felt both shock and disappointment. My name is Ellen. I was given a name that means to grow up cheerfully. I'm now turning 40. However, when I was 15, I discovered that a former lover of my father's was also named Ellen, which has led me to doubt the origin of my name. As a child, I didn't want to know much about my parents' delicate past, and in truth, I wasn't very loved from a young age. My brother Kent is 3 years older than me, intelligent, and has a charming personality. My parents wanted a boy, and being born the eldest son, Kent was dearly cherished. Our grandparents held the strict view that the first child must be a boy. Thus, under great pressure, my mother succeeded in having a boy. As a result, Kent was the most beloved in the family. As for me, I was always dressed in Kent's hand-me-downs, received less money from our grandparents during the years, and was always second to Kent when visiting relatives. To situations where it was usually said, "Endure because he's your older brother," I was raised under a peculiar form of lady education that distinctly stated, "Be modest and support the boys." In reality, I felt there was not just a step, but rather a 50 or 100-step difference between us. However, my strength lies in my naturally bright and straightforward personality. My parents always said I thought of nothing, but if I had been deep in thought, I might have become a resentful person, dark and bearing grudges against my brother. Kent is Kent, and I am me, and that's okay. Our family is that kind of strange family. By accepting this, I stopped caring about my parents' attitudes. Despite my parents' favoritism toward my brother, I am grateful to my parents for raising me, and I actually think that my brother, who has had a bad character and bullied me since we were children, is still family. I never truly hated him. However, that feeling changed due to an unexpected event. In my late 20s, while I was working, my father retired, and my mother, who had been a homemaker, began living on her pension. At that time, my mother fell ill, was left disabled, and required care. I thought my father would be by her side after his retirement, and my mother would be at ease. But that assumption was naive. "Ellen, it's too much for me. Come back home," he said. "What? No way. I can't work if I go home. Why don't you try a little before saying you can't do anything? You shouldn't speak that way to your father. Quit your job and come back. Don't you care about Mom? I can't just do that so easily." My father had always acted as the dominator at home, letting my mother handle everything. As a result, after she fell ill, he became helpless and seemed to be planning to make me take over her role at home. Kent worked close to home, so he should have asked him for help instead. Why did he turn to me, whom he had hardly cared about, at times like this? Just when I began to live freely, my father started contacting my company, and I couldn't focus on my work. This caused inconvenience to my bosses and colleagues, and I felt their cold gazes. Despite my desire to continue the job I loved, the persistent calls from my father wore me down mentally, and I reluctantly quit my job and returned home. But once I returned, the situation at home was dire. My jobless father, with too much free time, began indulging in horse racing, gambling away his pension as soon as he got it. Compared to before, his alcohol consumption increased, and he drank late into the night every day, with the table overflowing with empty beer cans. Despite it being shortly after his retirement, the savings for their old age I heard about were nowhere to be seen, and our financial situation was quite difficult. Hence, even when I suggested getting professional support for caregiving aside from the household chores, my father clearly avoided answering because of this reason. The arrears in utility bills continued, and with every pension payment, it felt like an uncontrollable financial juggling act. If this continued, his pension would continue to be used up as soon as he gets it. Out of necessity, I initially withdrew money from my savings to support our living expenses, and at the same time made the house wheelchair accessible for my mother. Later, I found a job locally, and while entrusting my mother to daycare services during the day, I worked and allocated about $2,000 each month for necessary caregiving and living expenses. Despite saving diligently from a young age, my savings were running low, and the outflow of money was greater than what I earned. Still, my father did not attempt to work and depended financially and in daily life entirely on me, unfortunately becoming fully reliant. For me, the daily life of handling household chores, work, and caregiving from morning till night was nearly reaching its limit. Honestly, I wanted to entrust my mother to a care facility and leave my problematic father and home behind. By doing so, I could allocate the money he was devouring from my living expenses to my own savings and living expenses. But my father strongly opposed the idea of sending my mother to a care facility without doing anything himself. My mother herself asked, "Why do I need to go to a care facility when you're taking care of me?" making it impossible to gain her agreement. I sought help from Kent, but he was reluctant to get involved, and ultimately, I was the one who had to make sacrifices. Thus, I ended up trapped in a prison called home. 3 years into this hellish cohabitation, Kent suddenly announced, "I got married because my girlfriend is pregnant," and returned home with his wife, Maggie, whom I had never seen before. Wow, I was expecting Kent's sister to be similar to him, but you're nothing like him. Not cute at all. Maggie evaluated me with a laugh at our first meeting. Her rudeness immediately provoked my antipathy. Despite it being her first visit, she walked around the house as if it were her own, entered my room without permission, freely used my cosmetics, and demanded, "This is nice, give it to me." She rummaged through the shelf where my mother's precious jewelry was stored, and inappropriately commented, "How much is 18-karat gold now?" She was clearly a dangerous woman. I couldn't help but think that she was no good. And even though she was married to my brother, I should cut ties with her. Also, it seemed that all my father and mother could think about was wanting to hold a grandchild, or wanting to name one, with the birth of a grandchild occupying their minds. I even felt envy at their innocence. I was somewhat uneasy about this new family connection, and that bad premonition became reality that day. But I'm anxious about raising my first child. "I need some help," Kent's wife, Maggie, said sweetly, twirling her hair around her finger. As she spoke, my father, looking at Maggie's chest, suggested with a grin, "Why don't you live here then?" "Really? Are you sure?" Maggie replied. "Of course," my father answered. While Kent and Maggie excitedly discussed living together with my parents, I couldn't help but ask, "But we don't have enough rooms. What will we do?" "You should just move out," my father said bluntly. "Excuse me?" I replied in shock, and even my mother smiled and added, "Yes, that would be best. Hurry up then." I thought I'd been quite giving all these years, but to be betrayed by my parents so easily, beyond belief. "Wait, what will you do if you kick me out now? I've been paying for the caregiving costs all this time, and I don't even have the money to move out. What about Mom's care?" I asked. "I'll pay for the caregiving costs. Unlike you, I work at a big company and don't have to worry about money," Kent retorted. With that, my father said, "Go on, Ellen. Go pack your things and move out today." He pushed me towards my room. He looked as if he had secured a valuable host, pleased with himself. "Move out today?" I thought, dismayed. It was snowing outside, and I wondered how I was supposed to manage life from here on. "Why, this is ridiculous," I said, showing my emotion, to which Kent dismissively said, "It's not ridiculous. You're just a naive and weak-minded sister." Then he harshly repeated, "I'm having a child, so we're living together now. You poor woman can get out." Stunned, I looked at my parents, and even my mother, whom I had cared for over the years, smiled and said, "I want to be with my grandchild," as she waved me goodbye. Dad then shouted, "Now get out," as he roughly stuffed my belongings into a bag and threw it out. "Please wait. I need somewhere to stay until I find a new place," I pleaded, but they heartlessly dragged me out of the house. No matter how many times I rang the doorbell, there was no response. After all this time being manipulated by my family and treated like a tool, I had always maintained a smile. Even when they were cold to me as a child, it was my way of self-protection. But my family was under a big misunderstanding. They think Ellen can endure anything, so there's no need to worry. That's absolutely not a joke. Don't make fun of me. Holding back tears, I left my family home and wandered the streets at night, aimlessly, until I finally found a taxi to take me to an internet cafe for refuge. After contacting a local friend, fortunately, she agreed to let me stay at her place for a while. Her support was incredibly reassuring. With her help, I saved up money and eventually became independent, starting to live on my own again. While I haven't saved enough money to move to another state yet, keeping a certain distance to avoid entanglement with my family while twietian, I've decided in my heart to move to another state, once I have enough savings. However, 2 years after making that plan, one day, unexpectedly, my father and Kent showed up at my apartment. It appears they found my address through public records. "Who is it?" I asked, pretending not to recognize them. At that, both my father and Kent apologized. "We're really sorry. We need help. Please do something about Maggie. We want to kick her out of the house," my father pleaded tearfully. So listening to their story, it was clear that their home was in chaos. Maggie, after their child had grown a bit, said with a smile, "I don't want to live with such a shabby family anymore," and kicked out her own family from the house. My father had been completely taken in by her and, deceived by her cunning words, had transferred the house's ownership to her name. It was less a takeover and more that he had willingly given it away. I had always felt something off about her from the stories I had heard. She claimed to have fallen in love with Kent at first sight and pursued him fervently. Kent, who was charming and adorable as a child, had grown into a burly, hairy man, a far cry from the typical handsome appearance. Considering she could have chosen any slender, attractive man, I had always wondered why she was drawn to him. The truth was, her intentions lay in Kent's wealth. It was later revealed that she had another man even after marrying Kent. While there's no doubt that Kent is the father of her child, it seemed her affairs continued even after their marriage. When Kent discovered this and confronted her, they were thrown out of the house the next day. Presumably, Maggie, anticipating that her affair might soon be exposed, skillfully convinced my father to transfer the house into her name. In the end, my family's foolish actions prevented them from enjoying time with the grandchildren they had looked forward to, and everything backfired. To make matters worse, Maggie had also used my mother's credit card without permission to buy a large amount of appliances and jewelry, maxing out the credit limit. Well, I had always sensed she was untrustworthy, so hearing this was more a confirmation of "I knew it" than a surprise. I no longer have a father or brother. Let me ask again, who are you? At that moment, the color drained from my father and Kent's faces. "What are you saying? Are you abandoning us too?" After that, Mom became bedridden and couldn't even use her wheelchair. "Don't you feel pity for your mother who was kicked out?" my father yelled. "Anyway, you're now like this because you changed the ownership of the house, didn't you?" I retorted. My father fell silent, clenching his teeth in suppressed anger. "Wait, Ellen, we're family, let's support each other." Ken attempted reconciliation, but I brushed off his hand. "I asked for help multiple times because it was tough handling Mom's care alone, but you refused every time. What are you trying to say now?" I pressed. "That's..." Kent stumbled over his words, and my father raised his voice in his stead. "Regardless of Kent, don't you have any gratitude for your parents? You've forgotten the kindness of being raised." In response, I glared sharply at them and countered. "I quit the job I loved and gave money to live together, enduring all this time. After being kicked out of the house, I'm not optimistic enough to still say thank you for raising me." "I've already apologized for that," my father said. So you think an apology makes everything okay? Then I'll apologize too. "Sorry, I'm going to abandon you." "I apologize, but I won't help." "But do forgive me," I replied calmly. "What are you saying, you impudent girl?" my father exclaimed, moving towards me in anger, to which I responded using self-defense techniques I learned in school. "Ouch, ouch," my father groaned in pain as he sat down on the ground. Kent just stared at me, stunned. At that moment, I impulsively threw a handful of salt that was by the entrance towards them. "Ah," they both cried out, covering their eyes as I showered them with salt, shouting, "I don't want to see your greedy faces anymore. Get out." I chased them from the porch. As my neighbors turned to look upon hearing my voice, I didn't feel embarrassed, even though my anger was clearly visible on my face. Dad tried again. "Wait, let's settle this through discussion. We're still family. I'm sorry, but I don't think we can understand each other. You're unreasonable, so don't contact me again," I declared firmly. As they backed away from the doorway, shielding their eyes, I managed to keep them at bay. "Listen, this is the last time. Don't interfere in my life anymore. I don't have a family anymore, so no matter what happens, I won't know about it," I yelled. With those final words, I gave them a cold look and firmly closed the front door. They lingered at the entrance for a while, hoping to talk, but when I threatened to call the police, they finally left. In the days that followed, I received several letters from my father. It seems my parents are now staying at my aunt's house, my mother's sister. The letters contained pleas like, "Don't you feel sorry for us? Help us. Reading them, I felt genuinely sorry for my aunt, who is now burdened by the troublesome elderly couple. According to the third letter from my father, they had imposed the caregiving burden on my aunt, causing problems with her husband, and they were once again kicked out. Now they are living in a cheap apartment, trying to reclaim their house, but since the title transfer was done by my father himself, they can't get legal help, and their chances of success are slim. As for Kent, he hasn't divorced Maggie but lives separately, having carelessly got involved with another woman and now being labeled a cheater. That woman was a friend of Maggie's, which could have been a trap, but there's no evidence. The divorce talks began when Kent first claimed the family broke down because of my wife's infidelity and demanded compensation. Maggie countered by saying, "There's no proof I cheated while raising our child. In fact, it was my husband who was unfaithful, and she's now demanding a large sum in compensation, property division, and child support." Because of the unproven infidelity, the divorce negotiations are stalled, sinking deeper into trouble. It's a messy and frightening situation, almost like a joke. Meanwhile, after several job changes, I ended up marrying someone I met at work. Since it was a workplace romance, we were cautious about being seen in public, so we didn't go out much. Instead, we rented apartments close to each other and virtually lived together, spending most days at one of our places, a sort of semi-cohabitation. One day, casually, he said, "Hey, this actress finally got married. Should we get married too?" His light-hearted proposal remains a lovely memory. Because we are both simple people, a grand surprise wasn't necessary, and I appreciated that. Being someone who doesn't show much reaction, I would have felt sorry for him if he had gone for a big surprise. Life really does spring surprises on you. 2 years into our marriage, I was blessed with triplets. Having no siblings, dealing with young children was new and challenging for me. Handling one kid is tough, let alone 3. I started to complain. Thankfully, not only my husband but his family were also there to support us enthusiastically. I gave birth to a boy and 2 girls. When I found out, I vowed to lie to love them equally. But that vow wasn't necessary, as I naturally came to love all 3 deeply. With 3 kids, managing equal attention, like holding hands, isn't always possible. At such times, I'd say 100 steps each. After 100 steps, we switch, keeping it fun. However, kids are whimsical, sometimes saying, "Today I want to hold hands with Dad instead." Still, it seems they love both their father and mother equally, which is the greatest joy for me. Going forward, I hope to build a home where everyone can be happy, just as my name suggests. And as I was thinking this, I noticed the triplets boldly scribbling on the walls of our new house with crayons. Oh, stop that. That's not going to make Mom or Dad happy. Oh dear, they are so close and doing the same mischief together. Ah, now the walls are colorful. As I scrub the graffiti off, memories of childhood come flooding back. Once, my brother and I scribbled on the wall, but only he was scolded, and I was ignored as if I didn't exist. Now, watching my own kids, I realize it's right to scold them fairly. When my husband comes home and sees me cleaning, he laughs and says, "It's tough, but their creativity is really something and helps me clean." Experiencing this warms my heart. This is what family is about. Supporting each other, sometimes scolding, sometimes praising, but above all, loving each other. I'm experiencing things with this family that I never did as a child. Our triplet approached us quietly, saying sorry, and I hugged while gently teaching them, "Next time, let's draw on a tipper." Many challenges lie ahead. But with this family, I feel we can overcome anything. My life truly starts here. Tomorrow we'll draw on a large sheet of paper together. It will surely make a wonderful memory. With that thought, we start preparing dinner as a family. Today, too, I am grateful for another happy day.